It's 7:59 p.m. on March 14, 2023. I'm going to begin reading A State and Revolution by V.I. Lenin, starting with the first section, starting on page 5. Chapter 1, Class Society and the State. 1. The state is a product of the irreconcilability of class antagonisms. What is now happening to Marxist teaching has, in the course of history, happened repeatedly to the teachings of revolutionary thinkers and leaders of oppressed classes struggling for emancipation. During the lifetime of great revolutionaries, the oppressing classes constantly hounded them, received their teachings with the most savage malice, and the most furious hatred, and the most unscrupulous campaigns of lies and slander. After their death, attempts are made to convert them into harmless icons, to canonize them, so to say, and to surround their names with a certain halo for the consolation of the oppressed classes, and with the object of duping the latter, while at the same time emasculating the essence of the revolutionary teaching, blunting its revolutionary edge, and vulgarizing it. At the present time, the bourgeoisie and the opportunists within the working class movement concur in this doctoring of Marxism. They omit, obliterate, and distort the revolutionary side of this teaching, its revolutionary soul. They push to the foreground and extol what is or seems acceptable to the bourgeoisie. All the social chauvinists are now Marxists. Don't laugh. And more frequently, German bourgeois scholars, but yesterday's specialists in the annihilation of Marxism, are speaking of the national germ in Marx, who, they aver, educated the workers' unions, and which are so splendidly organized for the purpose of conducting a predatory war. In such circumstances, in view of the unprecedentedly widespread distortion of Marxism, our prime task is to re-establish what Marx really taught on the subject of the state. For this purpose, it will be necessary to quote at length from the works of Marx and Engels themselves. Of course, long quotations will render the text cumbersome and will not help at all to make it popular reading, but we cannot possibly avoid them. All, or at any rate, all the most essential passages in the works of Marx and Engels on the subject of the state must without fail be quoted as fully as possible, in order that the reader may form an independent opinion of the totality of the views of the founders of scientific socialism and of the development of those views, and in order that their distortion by the now prevailing Kautskyism may be documentarily proved and clearly demonstrated. Let us begin with the most popular of Engels' works, The Origin of the Family, Private Property, and the State, the sixth edition of which was published in Stuttgart as far back as 1894. We shall have to translate the quotations from the German originals, as the Russian translations, although very numerous, are for the most part either incomplete or very unsatisfactory. Summing up his historical analysis, Engels says, "The state is therefore by no means a power forced on society from without. Just as little is it the reality of the ethical idea, the image and reality of reason, as Hegel maintains. Rather, it is a product of society at a certain stage of development. It is the admission that this society has become entangled in an insoluble contradiction which itself, that is, cleft into irreconcilable antagonisms which it is powerless to dispel. But in order that these antagonisms, classes with conflicting economic interest, might not consume themselves in society in sterile struggle, a power seemingly standing above society became necessary for the purpose of moderating the conflict, of keeping it within the bounds of order, and this power, arisen out of society, but placing itself above it and increasingly alienating itself from it, is the state." Pages 177 to 78, 6th German edition. This expresses with perfect clarity the basic idea of Marxism on the question of the historical role and the meaning of the state. The state is a product and the manifestation of the irreconcilability of class antagonisms. The state arises when, where, and to the extent that class antagonisms objectively cannot be reconciled. And conversely, the existence of the state proves that the class antagonisms are irreconcilable. It is precisely on this most important and fundamental point that the distortion of Marxism, proceeding along two main lines, begins. On the one hand, the bourgeois, and particularly the petty bourgeois ideologist, compelled under the weight of indisputable historical facts to admit that the state only exists where there are class antagonisms and the class struggle, correct Marx in such a way as to make it appear that the state is an organ for the reconciliation of classes. According to Marx, the state could neither arise nor maintain itself if it were possible to reconcile classes. According to the petty bourgeois and Philistine professors and publicists, it appears very frequently, then benignantly, refer to Marx to prove this, that the state does reconcile classes. According to Marx, the state is an organ of class rule, an organ for the oppression of one class by another. It is the creation of order, which legalizes and perpetuates this oppression by moderating the conflict between the classes. In the opinion of the petty bourgeois politicians, order means precisely the reconciliation of classes and not the oppression of one class by another. To moderate the conflict means reconciling classes and not depriving the oppressed classes of definite means and methods of struggle to overthrow the oppressors. For instance, when in the Revolution of 1917, the question of the significance and role of the state arose in all its magnitude as a practical question demanding immediate action on a mass scale, all the socialist revolutionaries and Mensheviks immediately and completely sank to the petty bourgeois theory that the state reconciles classes. Innumerable resolutions and articles by politicians of both these parties are thoroughly saturated with this petty bourgeois and Philistine reconciliation theory. That the state is an organ of the rule of a definite class which cannot be reconciled with its antipode, the class opposite to it, is something the petty bourgeois Democrats will never be able to understand. Their attitude towards the state is one of the most striking manifestations of the fact that our socialist revolutionaries and Mensheviks are not socialist at all, a point that we Bolsheviks have always maintained, but petty bourgeois Democrats with near socialist phraseology. On the other hand, the Kautskyite distortion of Marxism is far more subtle. Theoretically, it is not denied that the state is an organ of class rule, or that class antagonisms are irreconcilable. But what is lost sight of or glossed over is this. If the state is a product of the irreconcilability of the class antagonisms, if it is a power standing above society and increasingly alienating itself from it, then it is obvious that the liberation of the oppressed class is impossible not only without a violent revolution, but also without the destruction of the apparatus of state power, which was created by the ruling class and which is the embodiment of this alienation. As we shall see later, Marx very definitely drew this theoretically self-evident conclusion as a result of a concrete historical analysis of the task of the revolution. And, as we shall show in detail further on, it is precisely this conclusion which Kautsky has forgotten and distorted. We will end at the bottom of page 9 for this evening.